Her father and brother brazenly demanded our dream house for her bitchy sister and computer game-addicted husband. After years of enduring an unhealthy dynamic, my wife finally cut ties with her toxic father and brother when they audaciously demanded we forfeit our dream home for her unemployed sister, her irresponsible, game-addicted spouse, and their half a dozen children. My family-in-law has a very damaging relationship with my wife, and it has begun to impact my well-being. You see, during her childhood, my wife was the favored one, and her dad was exceptionally attached to her. Emily has confided in me that because her mom was frequently occupied with her career, her father and she spent considerable time together. However, I've observed that her brother Mike isn't treated similarly by her dad. Although I'm confident that her father cares for both his kids, it is evident that he has a preference for my wife. I am certain Mike must have felt this while growing up, which is why my wife has always tried to be a supportive elder sister, always present for him. But both Mike and her dad sometimes behave so outrageously that it crosses boundaries. For example, when we first began our relationship, Emily, who had just graduated from university, and her family, including Mike, resided in the same home. My parents-in-law had given her an entire floor to herself for privacy, allowing her to invite anyone she wished. This is why she occasionally invited me over to stay the night. However, on multiple mornings, Mike would burst into the room without knocking while we were still in bed. As you might imagine, there were times we were not appropriately dressed, yet he acted as if it were completely ordinary and started chatting with Emily about trivial matters. This was exceedingly awkward for me, as I was uncomfortable with him seeing me in my sleepwear. Before anyone comments, I completely understand that Emily lived with her family at that time, so perhaps I should have anticipated this. However, is it really too much to expect someone to knock before entering a room? I suppose siblings can sometimes be very close, but Mike and I were not familiar with each other when Emily and I first started dating, hence I found it extremely disrespectful. Naturally, I spoke to Emily about it and told her I wouldn't be visiting unless she put a lock on her door. She agreed. But as expected, Mike tried to force his way in the next morning. He started yelling about why the door was locked, jiggling the handle and banging on it, demanding that his sister let him in. Emily finally opened the door, and he stormed in, questioning the necessity of the lock. When he saw me, he pointed angrily and started yelling at Emily, accusing her of installing the lock because of this intruder. I was taken aback by his rudeness. Emily told him it was her decision to install the lock, but Mike wasn't convinced. He furiously claimed that siblings should have no secrets between them. Emily explained that there were no secrets, and that the lock was to prevent him from barging in while we were sleeping, as it was very disruptive. Hearing this, Mike turned his anger towards me, shouting that it was all my fault, and that I was coming between him and his sister. This was all too much for me, as I avoid confrontation, so I excused myself to go to the restroom. I could still hear him yelling and Emily trying to calm him down. When he finally left, Emily came to comfort me, apologizing for his behavior and assuring me that she would speak to him again to make him apologize to me as well. The following weekend, when I visited, he apologized with a very poor excuse, saying he needed to talk to Emily urgently about something. Hence, she thought it would be fine to enter. Emily firmly told him not to disturb us again, and he meekly agreed. Although this issue was resolved, it wasn't the only odd behavior he displayed towards Emily. If Emily and I disagreed on something, even minor things like movies, and Mike was around, he would start telling her that she should be with someone who shared her tastes, and that we were obviously mismatched. Emily would give him a disapproving look, but he would just smirk. Another incident was when he would ask me uncomfortable questions about my past, trying to pry into my life. Emily and I had been honest about our pasts from the very beginning, but I didn't feel comfortable sharing this information with her brother. Despite my feelings, he would ask me awkward questions like, "Why did your ex break up with you? Were you not good enough for him?" Or make comments like, "My sister's previous boyfriend was much more attractive than you." These questions and comments would occur whenever he and I were alone. I began to suspect that he was trying to undermine me. Initially, I kept silent, but as this continued, one day I had enough. I responded to his taunt by saying that I preferred my ex-boyfriend's family over Emily's because my ex-boyfriend didn't have intrusive family members. Mike looked surprised by my reaction, and this seemed to silence him for a while. What I said was essentially true. Even though Mike had a strange relationship with my wife, her father was no better. When I first came into her life, her dad would ignore me, but once he realized that Emily and I were serious, he started acting like I was trying to take his daughter away from him. He would purposefully ignore me at dinner or during family gatherings and act like I didn't exist. Emily sometimes noticed this and would try to talk to him about it, but he never changed. Her father once even called me pretentious and spoiled just because my parents sent me to a private school while he was a public school teacher. I even know he tried to persuade Emily not to marry me and told her to keep looking for a better match. Fortunately, my wife didn't care about his opinion and proposed to me anyway. When her father and Mike found out that she had proposed, they freaked out. Both of them called to tell me that perhaps this was a bad decision, and since Emily wouldn't listen to them, I should end the relationship and return the ring. I found this very strange and refused, telling them that they were overstepping by asking me to do such a thing when I loved Emily and wanted to spend my life with her. When they realized they couldn't convince me, her dad begrudgingly told me that I should strive to be the best husband for her and take care of her the way he had taken care of her all these years. I was a bit offended but tried not to take more offense to his words. Mike, on the other hand, called me a gold digger and said his sister deserved someone more suitable. He threatened to expose me before our wedding so that Emily would never marry me. After this conversation, I immediately talked to Emily about everything, and she was shocked at how rude they were towards me. She argued with them over this, but both her father and Mike insisted that I wasn't good enough for her. She told me to ignore them, and that she loved me regardless of what they thought. Although her words were comforting, I still felt bad that her own family wouldn't accept me. Emily and I had already decided to pay for our own wedding, so when her dad offered to cover half of our expenses, we declined politely, with Emily telling him how hard we had worked to save money for this special occasion. Instead of being happy for us, this made him even more upset, and he started telling Emily how sad he was that she didn't need him anymore. However, Emily's mom seemed very proud of us. Her mom, unlike her brother and father, was quite calm and never had an issue with our relationship. Since her dad continued to complain to Emily, we compromised by telling him that we would love it if he wanted to organize the rehearsal dinner for us. He agreed, and we appreciated the gesture. However, as the wedding approached, things took an unexpected turn. The first incident was when Mike invited himself to have dinner with us, telling Emily how much he missed her. By this time, Emily and I were living on our own after our engagement, so we thought he genuinely wanted to spend time with his sister. Emily asked me if I was okay with having dinner with him, and I reluctantly agreed, not wanting to be rude to my soon-to-be family member. While we were having a good meal, Mike suddenly started talking about how he absolutely detested unfaithful partners, and that cheaters were nothing but worthless. We looked at him curiously, wondering where he was going with this, when Mike looked me square in the face and asked how it felt to be a worthless cheat. My brows furrowed in confusion, and then Mike began to yell, accusing me of having an affair with my coworker, Zach. Emily asked him what he meant by that, and Mike triumphantly began pulling out pictures of me and one of my colleagues, waving them around and insisting that he had caught me red-handed. I knew that I had never been unfaithful to Emily, so I was curious as to why he thought I was having an affair with my coworker. Looking through the pictures, they appeared quite innocent. It's true that Zach and I were close coworkers, but only because we had both started at the company at the same time and helped each other whenever we made mistakes to avoid reprimand from our boss. Zach even had a girlfriend, and Emily knew about that. I didn't have a lock on my phone, and had always been transparent with Emily about all my colleagues. These casual moments captured in the photos were twisted by Mike into something they were not VJ evidence of an imaginary affair. In reality, it was far from his baseless accusations, and I felt a surge of irritation at his attempts to tarnish my integrity and strain my relationship with Emily. Before I could defend myself, Emily, shocked and visibly upset, stepped in for me. She asked Mike why he was following me around and taking pictures of me with my coworkers at various public places without anyone's consent. Mike, hearing this, started justifying that he only wanted to investigate me since I wasn't of their status, and he was afraid that I was marrying her to take away her money. Emily firmly told Mike that his claims were groundless and that he was creating unnecessary drama out of nothing. She tried to reason with him, asking him to stop spreading lies and trying to harm our relationship, but Mike kept yelling that she should open her eyes to the obvious affair. I also tried to tell him that we were just co-workers, but he vehemently stuck to his statements. The atmosphere grew tense as his accusations intensified. I had enough of his baseless claims and yelling, so I told Mike that I was going to file a police report against him for illegally taking my pictures and stalking me. His expression turned petrified as he looked at me and asked if I was serious. I told him that I had all the evidence, and that he had deliberately stalked me and taken these photographs of me with my co-workers without my consent, trying to defame me with absurd lies. Mike looked at Emily, and then at me, starting to plead that this was all just to protect his sister, and that he didn't think it was such a big deal. He began to beg Emily to talk to me since he had done all this for her, and if I filed a case, it would hamper his work and future. I firmly told Mike that only he could save himself at this point. Mike asked me what I wanted, and I told him that I would not file a case against him as long as he stayed far away from my life. At this point, there was nothing Mike could do to escape this situation. He looked at his sister, but Emily supported me and told him that he should be grateful that I was willing to let this go, since what he had done was clearly wrong. Mike begrudgingly agreed to stay away from me, and since that day, he and I haven't spoken. Emily continues to have a relationship with him, but he has never dared to talk to me again. The second incident occurred just the night before our wedding during our rehearsal dinner. Emily's dad, who had insisted on taking responsibility for the rehearsal dinner, declined our offer to help him in any way leading up to the event, assuring us that he would take care of everything. However, upon arrival, it became evident that the preparations were not as anticipated. The rehearsal dinner turned out to be a collection of plastic tablecloths on picnic tables and cold Mexican food. During dinner, he kept acting upset, making the whole celebration feel a bit off. He got drunk and started behaving inappropriately with the other guests, saying he couldn't wait for the wedding to be over and how stressful it had been, even though he did not contribute financially or in any planning. Eventually, Emily's mom got upset as well and escorted him out. Mike tried to protest, attempting to justify his father's behavior, but Emily's mom refused to listen. As you can imagine, it was a complete disaster, and I started freaking out that both these men would somehow spoil my wedding the next day. That night, Emily and I had our first fight. I told her firmly that she needed to uninvite both her dad and Mike since, clearly with the way they were behaving, they would definitely do something to upstage us during the wedding. My wife vehemently refused and tried to assure me that her mom would be there and wouldn't let them get away with anything. Then I had to threaten Emily that if she did not uninvite her father and brother, there would be no wedding the next day. Emily was visibly shocked by my demand, as I knew exactly how I sounded, but I was anxious thinking about what these men would be up to. I didn't want to be embarrassed again in front of my family and friends on my wedding day. Emily clearly didn't have strong boundaries, but I hoped with this ultimatum she would understand just how much they were starting to affect our relationship. Thankfully, Emily did understand and made the right choice. She called her mom early in the morning and let her know that her father and Mike were uninvited. Her mom didn't even seem surprised and assured her that she would make sure that they wouldn't show up uninvited. After a few moments of our conversation with her mom, Emily's dad and Mike started calling her continuously, clearly to convince her to let them come to the wedding. But Emily firmly told them that after how they had behaved with me throughout our relationship, she didn't feel comfortable with them being there. Hearing this, her dad started telling her how bad of a man I was for coming between him and his mother. Mike tried to reason with him as well, but Emily stood firm. I did feel bad that her mom couldn't come to our wedding because of her father and brother, and believe me, I felt terrible for my ultimatum. However, all my guilty feelings vanished when I later learned from some of Emily's cousins that Mike and her dad had planned on wearing white to our wedding. They told me how they all had a family WhatsApp group with only female members, and in this group, Mike had encouraged others to wear white too. saying there was no reason for the bride to be the only one in white. I was shocked at how low they could go just to hurt me. After learning this, I was glad they were uninvited. Emily did miss her family, but she also understood my perspective. Overall, we had a fantastic wedding, and no one tried to upstage us. Since that day, her dad and Mike stopped talking to me completely, which made me very relieved, and I was perfectly comfortable with it. They would only invite my wife over for dinner or on special occasions, which I didn't mind terribly. Her mom, on the other hand, was kind to me, and we continued to stay in touch over the years. Emily and I saved our money meticulously and eventually bought a new house this year. It is our very first home, and as you can imagine, we were very excited about finally owning something this significant. Her parents and Mike did come to visit our place for a small housewarming celebration, and on that day, to avoid them, I visited my parents and spent some time with my family. Now coming to the main issue. Last month, out of the blue, her dad called me. This was very unexpected since he and I had never talked with each other since the day I married Emily. Surprisingly, he asked me casually about how I had been and how my life was going. I was a bit taken aback by his sudden interest, but I answered his questions regardless. Then he started asking how it felt to live in such a huge house when it was just Emily and me. His words stung because Emily and I had been wanting to get pregnant for a long time, but due to some infertility issues, I was unable to get pregnant. Emily knew about this, and although we mourned that we might never be able to have children of our own, we eventually accepted it. I had told Emily several times when I first found out the news that she was welcome to divorce me if she wanted to, so she could eventually marry someone else and have her own children. But Emily had always stood by me. She loved me and told me it was okay for us to be childless as long as we had each other. Obviously, our families also knew about this, which is why her dad subtly commented on it. He then went on to inform me that Mike's wife was pregnant. I was shocked to hear this since this was going to be her 6th child. I had heard from Emily how jobless her husband was and didn't believe in using protection, which led to these accidental pregnancies. Mike's partner was the epitome of laziness and did nothing around the house to help her or the kids. I have heard from Emily that he treats his wife like his personal maid. He never even pays any bills around the house. Mike's wife works multiple part-time jobs while he spends the whole day gaming. Despite how much everyone has talked with her, she never breaks up with him. Her dad then continued, saying that since Mike's wife could no longer afford to keep working throughout her pregnancy, he thought it would be a good idea for Emily and me to give up our place since it was too big for a childless couple like us. I was taken aback by his demand and struggled to form words. I asked him if he was joking, but he went on to say that he was, in fact, very serious, and that Mike and his wife deserved to live in a bigger house, not have space at her own house to let them move in. She had asked them to move in with us. The weight of this announcement hung in the air, and I found myself trying to compose my response amid the whirlwind of emotions that now enveloped me. I explained to her that this was our house, which we were still paying for, and the notion of someone else moving in with us so abruptly without even asking for our permission was intrusive and ridiculous. However, my father-in-law emphasized that he had already talked with Emily, and she had agreed to this. This seemed bizarre, as Emily and I always shared everything with each other, and I knew for sure that she would have definitely told me if she had agreed to let her brother and his family stay with us. I firmly told my father-in-law that since the house belonged to both Emily and me, he couldn't give permission on his own without my consent. No one was allowed to live here with us without both of us agreeing to it. To compromise, I told him that I would be happy to host Mike and his wife for a few days if that VDJ TM's what they wanted, but I wouldn't allow them to move in with us. My father-in-law, on the other hand, started to yell at me, saying that making space for my brother-in-law and his wife was expected of me as a dutiful son-in-law, and that if I agreed to his demands, all our past issues would be forgiven. In anger, I replied, "Sure, I will be happy to let them have our place, but you see, we are still paying for this place, and I know that if Mike and his wife move in, they won't be helping us with the mortgage or the bills. Hence, I think you should take some responsibility and help pay for their living expenses. I will be happy if you can just cover the mortgage for us, and we can take care of the bills for everyone. I know you won't be able to pay the mortgage with just the one job you have, So tell me, when are you getting a second job to pay off the debt? My father-in-law, hearing this, erupted in a fit of rage, shouting and expressing his displeasure. He told me that it was ridiculous of me to ask him to pay the mortgage for us, and I retorted that it was equally ridiculous for him to expect us to take care of Mike's family and to let them move in. This pissed him off even more, and he continued to yell while I smiled in satisfaction. He disconnected the call when he realized that I wasn't going to give in to his demands. Soon after, Mike called, yelling at me for daring to ask his father to pay our mortgage. He continued, saying how he always knew that I was just a gold digger, and I told him that it was he who was being a gold digger for trying to live with us, and if he ever wanted to see who the real gold digger was in the family, he needed to look at his own partner, who did nothing to help him out. This seemed to shut him up. I firmly told him that he could bicker with me all he wanted, but I was never allowing his family into our house unless they wanted to help us with our mortgage. He accused me of being heartless and prioritizing money over family. The tables had turned, and I felt relieved at the prospect of standing up for myself and not backing down, regaining control of my home. However, I do feel a bit guilty thinking about my father-in-law, and I'm here on Reddit wondering if what I've done makes me the bad guy. Update 1. Thank you to everyone who has shown their support for me. To answer the most important question that everyone keeps asking, why would my father-in-law even demand such a ridiculous thing from us? It's because my father-in-law has always been this entitled. Clearly, my wife has let this charade go on for far too long, and she and I need to sit down and have a serious talk about this. It's pathetic how my father-in-law can lie about his own daughter just to get his way. My brother-in-law is just a pawn in his game, going along with whatever their father wants because he has always heavily favored Emily. Mike just listens to whatever his dad says in the hopes of gaining his favor as well. In this case, Mike stood to gain from the situation since he could rely on us to pay his bills and take care of his children, while his useless partner did nothing. I am waiting for Emily to return from her business trip so we can discuss this. I don't want to bring it up over the phone since it's too important. Update 2. It's been 3 days since my last update. As I mentioned earlier, I was waiting for Emily to return. When she got back, we finally sat down and talked. I told her about how her father had called me, demanding that we give up our house for her brother and his family. Emily was clearly taken aback hearing this, and I went on to tell her the entire story. She then confessed that she had no idea about all this, and that the only thing her father had told her before she left was that her brother's wife was pregnant. That's all she knew about the situation, and she had no idea that he would make such ridiculous demands. I told her firmly that I expected her to talk to her father regarding this and deal with the situation since I couldn't handle her family, and she agreed. She called her dad in front of me and asked him why he had lied to me about her agreeing to this. Caught red-handed, her dad tried to backtrack, saying that he didn't exactly lie and that he knew she would have no problem with her brother living with us. So he had decided to take matters into his own hands and asked me directly. Emily stopped him mid-track and asked why he assumed that she would have no problem with Mike and his entire family moving in. Her dad told her that since she and Mike were close, he assumed she would be willing to help him out by allowing his family to move in. Hearing this, I closed my eyes in frustration but kept my mouth shut since Emily needed to handle her father. My wife then firmly told him that there was no way she was letting Mike, his jobless partner, and their 6 children move in with us, and that he had no right to force us to take care of them. Her dad started yelling that Mike really needed someone at this point, but Emily told him that it wasn't our responsibility, and that if he wanted, he should take care of Mike himself. Her dad then began to say how her mother didn't want that, and that their house was too small. But we were living in such a huge house, so we could easily help out. He even went on to say that since I was childless, I could help take care of Mike's kids, and this would make me feel fulfilled. My eyes widened in shock, but for the first time I watched Emily's face change color. She yelled back at him that he had no right to say something so insensitive about me, and that he couldn't use that against me to force me to take care of Mike's children. She continued telling him that their mother rightfully didn't want anything to do with Mike, since he had become a burden and that she was done with both of them. Her dad tried to backtrack, but Emily continued to yell at him that she had tried her best to have a good relationship with them even after they had continuously disrespected me, but she couldn't take this anymore. He started begging her, but Emily told him that this was our house, and I was her spouse, and anyone who disrespected me disrespected her as well, and didn't deserve to stay in our lives. With those final words, Emily cut the call. Since then, she has had no contact with both her father and Mike. Her mother did call to talk to her, but after learning of the entire incident, he understood exactly why Emily had taken such a drastic decision. Her mom talked and apologized to me on behalf of her husband, but I told her that it wasn't her fault anyway. Update 3. It's been an interesting 2 weeks. A lot of people suggested I install cameras around my place just in case Emily's father and Mike decided to show up and create a scene. So I did order them online and installed them all around my place. Well, as luck would have it, they did decide to show up last weekend, knocking on my door while I was all alone. When I saw that they were there from my camera, I called Emily immediately, and she said she was on her way. When I opened the door, there they were, my father-in-law and Mike, looking furious. They demanded I let them in, but I stood my ground, refusing to allow them entry and telling them that if they had anything to talk about, they could talk to me from outside. Her father started yelling about how heartless I was, accusing me of being greedy and selfish. I calmly told him that this was our home and that they had no right to barge in uninvited. He continued his tirade, unaware of the cameras capturing every moment. I calmly reminded him of our previous conversation, reiterating that I would not be giving up my home for Mike and his wife, and that if they had anything further to talk about, they should wait for Emily to come back home. Mike, in turn, started to yell that I was breaking up the family for no reason, and that I was being too stubborn. He told me that not only was I a gold digger, like he had always known, but now I was trying to take his sister away from them. I then informed them that whatever they were saying was being recorded by our cameras, and that I would be using this evidence to get a restraining order against them, so that next time they couldn't come within 150 feet of our house. Their eyes widened in shock, and her father yelled that I wouldn't dare do that. I smirked at him and told him that if they didn't get off our property this very minute, he would be receiving a legal order very soon. This scared them straight, and Mike started to say that I was overreacting and that it wasn't a big deal. Fortunately, at this point, Emily arrived. She walked towards us calmly and asked her father what they were doing there. Her father rushed to hug her, but she deflected him and asked him firmly again what he and Mike were doing here. Mike started to say that they knew it was me who was trying to control her life by not letting her talk to them, and that they had come here to confront me. I rolled my eyes at how absurd they both sounded. Emily clarified to both of them that it was she who had made the decision to go no contact, and that she did not want anything to do with them. Her father started to beg her at this point to forgive him, but she simply asked them to leave the property, or she would have no choice but to call the police. Their eyes widened in shock. Clearly, neither of them had expected this reaction from her. Emily went on to tell them that if they ever showed up at our house again, then we would be free to call the police on them and have them removed forcefully. They looked devastated, but Emily didn't care anymore. I felt relieved that my wife was finally standing up for me. Eventually, both of them left, still fuming. Since then, Emily has talked with her mother, who was as shocked as us that her father and Mike had gone behind her back to show up at our house unannounced. She assured us that we were right not to let them in. She is also becoming increasingly frustrated with their behavior. I know that with Emily being so firm about it and kicking them out, they will not dare set foot on our property ever again. If they do, well, I will contact a lawyer and send them a notice immediately. I'm glad that my wife has finally realized how toxic her family is, and hopefully they won't trouble us anymore so we can peacefully live our lives. I hope this is my last update since I want to move on from this situation as well.